Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, it's John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 1 of our 5-part Unstable full set review, where today we're going to look at the faction Order of the Widget. So we're going to do things a little bit different than we normally do with set reviews. This is an unset, so why not put a different spin on it, right? Instead of color pie order, we're going to go in faction order. Now, Order of the Widget is the faction that encompasses cards from blue and white. Today, we're going to look at all the cards that have that watermark on them. We're also going to look at all the white cards that have no watermarks, as well as artifacts that have no watermarks, and a few other random ones, too, that didn't really fit into a particular bucket. Now, quickly before we get started, though, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to support what we do here. You're going to find our Patreon page linked below. You're also going to find some products on Amazon linked. And then finally, Flipside Gaming's website is linked there too, where they've given a promo code for our viewers to save some cash, which is pretty awesome. You can pick up Unstable there and pre-order it, among many other things. With that being said, let's get into it. We got a lot to talk about. We're going to start off with Ariel Toastmaster. And one thing I do want to point out as we get into the cards, another thing you're going to notice is we're not going to get hyper crazy into trying to identify all of the ways to play this card and be as spiky as possible. I will identify some of those ways, but this is meant to be a fun look at the cards and talk about different interactions that they have with each other, especially in the limited formats. So with this particular one, first thing you want to notice here is it's an artifact creature. You're going to see a lot of that. Artifact creatures are a key part of this particular faction, especially in white. White is probably the primary color of the faction. You're going to notice that as we go through some of these cards. Blue is an important part of the faction, of course, but white is really the backbone of it when you look at some of these artifact interactions. This card is also a rigger, which could matter. We'll talk about more of those cards that will matter with this later in the week, of course. But at least for right now, yeah, this is actually a really decent card. It's a 3/2 flyer for 4. Just that in general is pretty good. And then the ability to pay for it and sacrifice another artifact to assemble a contraption feels really sweet in this particular archetype, because you're going to have the ability to create artifact creatures or even turn other creatures into artifacts if necessary. So there's a lot of opportunity here to get the full value out of this card. Assuming you have some good contraptions you want to roll into, then yeah, this is very playable. Actually, regardless, this is very playable. Amateur Orator. This card's awesome because this feels like it could be in like any set, like a black bordered set. It does feel maybe a little power level push. Like I feel like if this was in a black bordered set, it'd be like white and 2. But it's a bear with upside, and being able to get rid of an enchantment on the fly is pretty awesome. But what I love most about this card is the flavor text. That they actually have Ravnica the Musical on the card with those lines. I mean, yeah. So that's the real draw here. By no means. This is actually an interesting card. The fact that it allows you to manipulate counters of any kind into artifact creatures and then back into counters is actually really intriguing. And yes, there's ways to abuse that in this set, like in draft and sealed and such. There's a lot of good things you could do with this card. And it costs 3 for an enchantment. Like, I feel like that's reasonable. But if you take this card into black bordered world, there's a lot of crazy things you could do with it. I mean, shifting around, even just simply shifting like +1/+1 counters into creatures and then shifting those into loyalty counters or vice versa. Like, there's all sorts of random weird interactions that you could create with a card like this when you start looking at the library, the full history of Magic. And because of that, any play group that does allow some silver border cards into their commander, I know technically it's not legal, but there does feel like there's a lot of cards in this set designed with that in mind, and we'll talk about some of them today as a matter of fact. But if your play group does allow that, then this might be a fun card to kind of play around with and try some different combinations. Chivalrous Chevalier. This card's okay. Like, the big draw for me here is it's an artifact creature, or it's a flyer. Like, that's usually why I'm going to pick this card and decide to play with it. I just need a curve filler that is an evasion creature, basically. If I have that, or I just need an artifact creature, then maybe I'm happy with it. But if not, I could see myself passing this a lot. Now, the card itself, let's not skip the quirkiness of it, because this is the real draw, again, of the card. That if you have the center of the battlefield and you complement an opponent, then you don't have to bounce the creature back to your hand. So... and that's really nice. You should compliment your opponent. Sure, maybe there's times where you want to bounce the creature, like as a good enters battlefield effect or something, then yeah, I guess you don't compliment your opponent then. But generally, yeah, I think it's a really nice card, if nothing else. Maybe it doesn't always make your cut. Do-it-yourself Seraph. Very powerful mythic for this particular color, right? If you're not all in on this plan, the card probably becomes a lot worse. But if you're all in on the plan, this card's really good. So probably better in draft than sealed most of the time. But, I mean, look at this thing. It costs 6 for a 4/4 flyer. Okay, that feels a little overcosted just on stats alone. But then let's go beyond that. Whenever it attacks, you get to search your library for an artifact card, exile it, then shuffle. Keep in mind, all of these artifact creatures we're looking at today, they will all count as artifacts. That's pretty sweet. And then it steals the text box or whatever you chose. So this creature can start to build up and get a lot of crazy abilities on it, perhaps, right? Again, another card that would work really interesting in black bordered world, like in Commander, if you had the opportunity to play it there. But even within the limited set, can be very, very powerful at times. Now, the only drawback I would say, though, you're paying a lot of mana, and if this thing gets destroyed after you exiled a couple cards, I don't know, did you get your money's worth out of it? Maybe, maybe not. But still, I'll take the risk any day. The card has potentially a strong upside. Go to Jail. Okay, this card is super sweet. Now, it doesn't have a watermark, but we'll talk about it anyway. Monopoly, one of my favorite Hasbro properties from when I was younger. Before Magic was invented, we used to play a lot of Monopoly, me and my friends. We used to play Risk. We used to play games like Axis and Allies. Supremacy was another war game we used to play. But a lot of that got taken away by Magic in the mid-90s when it came out. So Monopoly, though, still have a lot of fond memories of that. And Go to Jail is just a really sweet homage to that particular game. Now, the card itself is still really good, too, for a common. I mean, yes, if your opponent rolls the doubles, they get their creature out of jail. So you kind of have to look at this as a tempo play more than actually just, say, a removal spell or something like that. Like you might think of some other cards that are like this in Black Border World. But that's okay. For 1 mana, I'm fine with that. It feels like a really good card, actually. And I love it. It's called Go to Jail. Jack Knight. Okay. This card is actually super sweet. It's a rare, but you want to have the artifacts and contraptions to back it up. If you have them, you're going to be pretty happy with this card just generally, I think. Now, if you don't, maybe skip this card. It's a little fragile just on its own as a 1/1. But if you got the backup, this feels like it could be really good for you. Because think, again, all these artifact creatures that are in this color, contraptions count as artifacts, very important. You get the extra bonus when you assemble a contraption. Pretty sweet there, too. This card's doing a lot for this color. Knight of the Kitchen Sink. This one's going to cost 2 white, which is very reminiscent, of course, of the old school Knights, and that's what they're going for here. 2/2 first striker, and instead of like protection from black or protection from white or something like that, it has protection from black borders. So really sweet. I didn't see a rules clarification on this particular card, but my assumption is the card it's directly interacting with would have to be black bordered for the protection to be sufficient. I don't think you can pull something like, well, this card was at one time printed in black border, but now I'm playing the white border version. I think it probably would have to truly be a black border card. That feels like the way to look at it. So just generally, though, really good creature. I mean, it's still a 2/2 for striker for 2, regardless. There is 1 black border card in this set. Of course, we'll look at it in a few days once we get there. But even if you're just playing against a bunch of silver border cards and limited, it's still a first striker. I'm happy to run it. Knight of the Widget. Okay. So this card rewards you for the watermarks for this particular faction. This card has a watermark, so it does come into play as a 1/1 if nothing else. You don't want that for 3 mana, of course. But even if you have a couple other cards with watermarks, like it's a 3/3 Vigilance for 3, that actually feels really good. If it happens to be a 4/4, even better. So again, play this in conjunction with a lot of other cards in this particular faction. I think you'll be really happy with it. Midlife Upgrade. This is an interesting sorcery. Not cheap for 4. But if you have good contraptions and you're trying to like hit a particular one, this might be a good card to run. It's not always going to make your cut. Do keep in mind, though, too, you could make X0, so if you have no contraptions, you can get 1 off of it, but that feels a little expensive, 4 mana for 1 contraption. There's better deals in this set. But if you're in a corner, I guess it's just fine for you. But again, I'm probably only running this if I'm really trying to hit like a particular, maybe mythic one that I happen to get or something like that. Oddly Uneven. Okay, this one is just a sweet kind of reciprocal removal spell that you have a little bit of control over. Little high variance, sure, but if you're backed into a corner and you need a panic button, I think this will suffice. It's not a Wrath of God, but I think it will suffice. Old Guard. Okay, this one's super sweet because of the flavor, right? Like, how many times do you hear people grumbling about reminder text on cards? So the Old Guard is going to take care of that for you. Tap target creature without reminder text. So kind of funny. I mean, I can't touch things with reminder text. I almost feel like maybe thematically that should have been reversed. I don't know, but Still, regardless, I think it's a fine creature to run. I mean, it's not always going to help you, but it's still a 2/1 for 2, and it has that ability, and it's an artifact, so I think it's got enough upside here. Riveting Rigor. Okay, this one is actually kind of sweet, I think, because you get a lot of value here in a common. A 2/2 for 3, if you can sacrifice that artifact, now it's going to be a 4/4 coming into the battlefield, plus you get to assemble a contraption for 3 mana. That feels really good to me. Now, it's not as great, obviously, if you can't sacrifice the artifact. Then it's not really good. 2/2 for 3 is not exciting. But if you're in this color, I think most of the time you're going to be okay. Yes, it does tempo you maybe a little bit, depending on board state and everything going on, sure. But when you can pull it off, this is going to feel great for 3 mana. Rules Lawyer. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on this card. I could probably talk about it all day. But I'm just going to simply say this. If you want to turn the game upside down on its head, just play this card. I mean, 5 casting cost is not the cheapest thing in the world. It's a 1/1. It's meant to be fragile. It's meant to die quickly. It only affects you and your other permanents, but it disrupts everything you've ever known about Magic by removing state-based actions, basically. And they cover everything from what happens when you're down to a low life total, like 0 or less. If your toughness on your creature goes below 0 or to 0, covers the legendary rule, it covers loyalty counters of planeswalkers, like everything is affected by this thing. So this is going to be a super confusing card. It's going to lead to a lot of crazy questions. The idea is it's supposed to be a topsy-turvy thing, turn the game upside down until someone can get rid of it. That's what it does. And I guess mission accomplished. Sacrifice Play. This one's one of the find someone from outside the game cards, which is cool if you're at a game store. It might be a little awkward if you're playing at home with friends. You don't have anyone outside the game. I mean, they don't need to know Magic. You can just pick someone random and then just tell them make a decision. So it could be kind of fun, high variance, sort of weird thing to do. This particular card, though, aside from that actual interaction, I mean, feels like a very normal white instant spell that we've seen many times. It just puts a twist on it. So good removal card, and again, the variance level and the unlevel of the card is kind of pushed by that ability. Side quest. This one's actually kind of interesting. Again, another kind of look at outside the game card. This time you're letting someone borrow a creature, and if it comes back to you alive, it gets 2+1/+1 counters. Feels pretty good, actually, for 1 mana, but it's got to survive. Now, your opponent is playing another Magic game. They might say, hey, you know, I got a free chum blocker now, and so there goes your creature. Or they might actually be able to let it live and preserve it for you, and maybe can return the favor later with another one of, if they play one of these type of cards, right? So, I don't know, it feels pretty sweet. It's a cool idea, I think. All right, let's move on to blue. Today we're just looking at blue cards that have the watermark for this faction. Animate Library is the first one, and this is a fine rare. I mean, if you can animate your library, it could be big. I mean, sometimes it won't be great if you get this card late or something, but if you get this card early on, you cast it for 6, you might have a 20/20 creature or something unlimited. That could feel pretty good, right? So it doesn't have evasion, sure, or anything like that, but it could still have a board impact. It's a relatively safe card to play too, because anything that would basically take it off the battlefield will just remove this enchantment. You get your library back. Phasing? Phasing might be an issue, but that's not in this set, so you don't have to worry about that in limited anyway. Blurry Ball. Okay, this is kind of cool. Sometimes it's unblockable. It depends on your opponent when you played it. If it is, it's awesome, because then you just loot every turn, basically. Do 1 damage and loot. That's kind of awesome. Your opponent's going to have to deal with it. If they can block it, though, then it's not that important of a card. So I guess kind of know your opponent if you think they're going to be wearing glasses or not, I suppose. Chipper Chopper. Here's kind of the blue variant on the card we just saw. This one has flying, so it costs 4. It's a 1/1, but with flying. But if you can sacrifice another artifact, 2+1/+1 counters and assembles a contraption, feels really good for 4 mana. Actually getting a 3/3 flyer and assembling, I'm on board. Actually, another great common to play in limited. Insight. Okay, this is a way to turn your mana into contraptions, basically. So, really simple idea. Probably the most entertaining thing about the card is simply the name, Insight. But if you have good contraptions, definitely worth running. Also, too, keep in mind, like, artifacts on the battlefield are a big deal with this particular faction. So, even if you don't care about necessarily some of your contraptions, maybe you got some lame common ones that you're not excited about, might still be worth running in case they just have a whole, like, artifacts matter theme going on generally. Kindly Cognition. Okay, this one is another kind of artifacts matters card this time. Spells you cast that refer to artifacts or contraptions and their rules cost 1 less to cast. That's actually really good. Again, in this faction, more than anything, sure. But still, very good for 2 mana and can lead to some big plays down the road. Socketed Sprocketeer. Okay, this one's kind of interesting because it is a die roll manipulation card, and you don't see a lot of that in this particular faction, but this does have the watermark because it is an artifact creature, but it also could play well maybe with some other factions potentially. Where this gets interesting, though, is some of the cards we're going to look at later in the week, where sometimes it matters just when you roll a die, and this is an ability that you could roll a die every turn if you wanted to. Every once in a while, you even get some card draw out of it. Granted, 1 in 6 chance, but still, could get some card draw. A little slow, maybe, but if that happens, wonderful. Eventually, maybe this replaces itself. So I can see where this doesn't always make your cut, depending on your build and such, but it's an interesting card. It does interact really well with a lot of cards in the set outside of the faction. It's too bad this can't impact the opponent's die rolls. This time it's only your die roll. If it could, maybe it would have a little more utility. Wall of Fortune. Here's another card that's very similar. Of course, again, it's manipulating die rolls, and it can be yours, could be your opponent's. This one, though, also being an artifact creature and a 0/4 defender for 2, feels pretty economical to me. So even if I'm not all in on any sort of dice roll plan, I feel like this could be a very runnable card. The Grand Calcutron, as we move into some multicolor. This is a legendary artifact. It is a mythic, and it's just an interesting card. Like, I'm trying to wrap my head around how this is better for me than my opponents, or how I can build a deck where it's better than me for my opponents. It does give everyone information. I mean, everyone plays with their hand reveal. That does change up the game. Having to choose the order you're going to play your cards also changes up the game, especially messes up people that might have removal spells or control magic, because they have to really start to prioritize when they want control open and when they want like their creature open or something like that. So it's interesting. I will give it that. One other thing that's worthy to point out, Mark Rosewater mentioned on Blogatog that it is legal to use this card as your commander. If you play commander, again, it's not legal technically, Black Border Commander or anything, but if your opponents allow you to do so, if your play group is cool with it, then you can do that. That's actually not on the card written in text, but something Mark Rosewater did amend. Hot Fix. I was talking a lot about this card when it was previewed. It seems like a super sweet, fun card. You have 10 seconds to dig through your deck and try to manipulate the order. That's not a lot of time, and I mentioned this before, but imagine like how many times you try to tutor for a creature or for any spell, and you go through and you don't see it right away, and you end up thumbing through your deck like 2 times. So if that happens, you might be out of luck here, and you don't want to waste 6 mana, because this is not cheap. I think you look at this more like a Vampiric Tutor, though, than really manipulating like half your deck, because that's just not going to happen. You don't have the time. So you go through, you find the card you want next, you get that on top. If you find it fast, maybe you get a second card if you're super lucky, right? That's kind of where you're going with this. You don't want to be touching your deck after 10 seconds because 6 mana is a lot to throw away, right? So you want to get this right and just do your best with it, but don't expect it to be able to always like do amazing things. Think of it as a Vampiric Tutor, basically. Urza Academy Headmaster. Okay, this doesn't really fit into a particular bucket, but it's a cool card. I thought we'd talk about it today. And first off, the art is incredible. I love the art on this Urza's head with some sort of crank on it to get the power. Even lore-wise, it kind of makes sense because the old planeswalkers like Urza were like omnipotent. So having all this power, I guess all these years later, like that power is still there and is, I guess, able to maybe come out through the crank, but you can't really control it. So who knows what it's going to actually do. That's what this card does. Now, we haven't seen the website yet turned on, so we don't know what the effects will be. So the website's up and running, but if you click on anything, it just says that it's not really going to function until December 8th. Now, who knows what we'll get? We could get a whole bunch of wacky things. We could get planeswalker abilities that already exist in a randomizer. This does cost 1 of each color, so the color pie's covered here. They can pretty much do whatever they want, so that's a good idea. And I'm sure the abilities will coincide with what a +1, -1, -6 should feel like for the most part. So, yeah, seems really sweet. Like, I'm looking forward to seeing the abilities. Can't really talk too much about the card until then, though. All right, let's move on to some artifacts. Again, you're going to see the faction artifacts here as well as anything that does not have a watermark, beginning with Border Guard. And you know what? Even if you're just playing Silver Border, this is pretty good. I mean, 1/1 for 4 doesn't feel great. But whenever you cast a Silver Bordered spell, after that point, getting this +1/+1, wonderful. And if you are playing with a mixture of cards, there is 1 Black Border card in the set, keep in mind. But if you're playing with a mixture of cards, just casually or something, card gets better. Buzzing Wackadoodle. I think most of the time your opponent's going to try to match you, which makes a fun kind of game of rock, paper, scissors, trying to think about what your opponent might be thinking, what you think they're thinking, so on and so forth. Drawing a card, probably the best ability of the three, but the other two aren't bad either. For 4 mana, like any of these abilities are just going to be fine for you. The Doodle may be the least exciting, but sometimes relevant. Whack is just fine, especially towards the end of a game. And Buzz, again, probably the one you want most of the time consistently. Cog Mentor, one of the few ways, I don't know, maybe the only way, I'll have to think about that, where you can actually move one of your contraptions to a different sprocket. And that actually feels kind of sweet, because for 4 mana, I could actually play my best contraption ability every single turn instead of every 3 turns. If I have 8 mana, I could even do it with 2 if I wanted to. So that could be really sweet if you have the right contraptions to back it up. It's a little fragile, obviously, as a 1/1. It might not last long if you are abusing it, but hey, if you get a couple activations out of it, it could be real good. Every Thingamajig. Okay, this is another just sort of random card that feels like it would have a lot of crazy interactions in black bordered world. I mean, good ones in silver bordered too. But when you look at this thing for 5 mana, first off, it's a little expensive. I mean, 5 and then 2 to use one ability, 3 for another, 4 for another. But they're all really good abilities. I mean, Proliferate is awesome. 4 for a Proliferate just generally is great. Putting a +1/+1 counter on target creature, that's really good too. Now, that first ability, though, is really interesting. Tap it for 2, and you get to move a counter from one card to another, and it becomes whatever type of counter that card mentions that it's going on to. And if it doesn't mention a counter, then it's just a +1/+1 counter. So, yeah, sometimes that's good for moving +1/+1 counters, but it also could create some really weird interactions. Again, open your mind to a lot of different Magic cards that have been printed over the years, a lot of crazy things you could do with something like this. Perhaps, again, maybe in a commander type situation. Kindslaver. Okay, this is obviously a take on Mindslaver, another kind of go outside the game sort of card. This one's a rare. And yeah, maybe the person you choose wants to help you out, maybe they don't. But notice it's a person outside the game controls target player during that player's next turn. It could even be you. You could say, hey, LSV, come over here and play my turn. So you could do that. Or assuming LSV's in the room. I mean, I don't know where you're playing. You're unset with LSV in the room, but maybe you do that. If not, I mean, obviously the other option is you pick somebody to play your opponent's turn, maybe someone who doesn't know Magic, you know, so a lot of fun, different interactions you can do with this. Modular Monstrosity, really sweet card. It costs 7 for a 3/3. It starts off a little bit weak, but once an opponent casts a spell, now you have the option to create a keyword ability for this card. Now, it has to be something that's been printed on a Magic card in the past, but that opens you up to a whole lot of stuff. And you only have 5 seconds to think of it. And you can't use the same one during the course of a day, which is a little awkward. I guess, how would people know if you were playing different matches? I don't know. I guess you just have to use the honor system there. But what's weird about it is, let's say I play this and my opponent wants to destroy it. If they use, say, a black removal spell and they cast it, it's on the stack, I can say protection from black. But I can only do that once per day, right? So, yeah, it's kind of cool. It protects it. I mean, if you're thinking about other more offensive things you can do with the card, I mean, there's plenty of them. Annihilator 6 came to mind when I first saw this card, but there's so many other crazy things you could do. Really cool idea. Another really nice design, I think. Staff of the Letter Magus. Okay, this is an artifact, charm kind of card that's going to sit out there and gain you life. I'm usually not a big fan of those type of cards, but this one puts a fun twist on it too, right? Like, first off, NRST. I think mathematically the best choice of letter is L, but I haven't added up like the letters in the set or anything. So maybe in the set that's different, but just generally in the English language, if you can't pick N, R, S, or T, L, I think is your next best choice. So just a little tip there. But there you go. Sometimes the life gain does matter. Sometimes having an artifact, as we saw today, will matter. That's maybe the reason you play this over any other reason. Stamp of Approval. Great for draft. Like if you can draft a watermark, like really heavy into a faction, and then pick this up, you're going to be having a really good day. So I think that's pretty sweet. Also, too, again, if you go outside the world of this unset, watermarks do exist in other cards, like the Ravnica Guilds. We saw watermarks, of course, in the clans from the Tarkir block. So a lot of different watermarks exist out there. Now, Mark Rosewater did say the Shooting Star watermark on foil cards, the old foils, does not count as a watermark for these purposes. However, there's still a lot of other places you can go with this. Steel Squirrel. This is actually pretty sweet for 2 mana, I think. Now, it's better if you have a lot of like die roll effects. If you have die roll effects, then every once in a while, you might be able to get in for a pretty big attack with this thing. At 5/5, 6/6, potentially every once in a while, actually 33% of the time, technically, this will work out for you and get that bonus of either 5/5 or 6/6. And that's pretty good. Now, it also has a mana sink where you can roll dice. Now, the problem is it's 6 mana. It's kind of expensive. So if you don't have a lot of ways to roll dice, I'm probably skipping this card. But if you have a fair amount, like, I'd run it and be pretty happy with it. And also, too, keep in mind, we're talking about 6-sided dice here generally. But there are cards that allow you to roll different things. We're about to see one in just a second. And imagine if you rolled a d20 with this. That'd be really good. Speaking of which, Sword of Dungeons & Dragons. Okay, this one's kind of a reprint because it was part of the HasCon set that they sold at that convention. Now, this is the only card they reprinted from that set. They reprinted this and, of course, the token that goes along with it. But it is a mythic in the set. You have another opportunity to get it. It does allow you to roll a 20-sided dice. That does interact well with a lot of other cards. Other than that, it's just a cool card. I mean, nice flavor behind it for a magic sword and also for fans of Dungeons & Dragons. Really cool idea. All right, let's move on to the contraptions, of course, for this faction. We're going to look at applied aeronautics. Now you're going to notice the commons aren't super exciting, but one thing you're going to see here, which I think is cool, is for the most part, these are going to turn a creature into an artifact creature. It doesn't have to be your creature either, notice. So every once in a while, that might be relevant. But if it is your creature, that could be really good with some of these artifact matters or numbers of artifacts on the battlefield matters cards that you see in this particular faction. This one also gives +1/+0 flying till end of turn, which is nice too. You get something big, evasion every once in a while. There's nothing wrong with that by any means. Auto key, another common, again, if you just want to turn more of your stuff into artifacts periodically. I think that's why you play this. Other than that, I mean, yeah, in some ways it's a free roll because it's a contraption, but you do have to tap the creature to get the 3 life. That feels a little awkward sometimes, and you're only getting 3 life. I don't know. It just doesn't feel that great. 3 life every 3rd turn, maybe. Doesn't feel like I'm very impressed by that. But again, if I'm interested in turning stuff into artifacts periodically, then I might think about playing this one. Duplication device. Okay, this one's kind of sweet, actually. It's a rare. Now, it's a little high variance because you do have to have a card that you want to be able to turn into something else on the battlefield. And if that situation isn't set up for you, then it doesn't really do a whole lot. But if it is set up for you, this can be very good. Like turning like a gnome token into the best thing on the battlefield could be great for you. You'd be really happy to do that a lot of the times, right? So also, too, it does create another artifact if it is targeting something that wasn't already an artifact. Sometimes that will matter. Gnome Ball Machine, of course. Okay, this one's an uncommon. You get 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifacts out of it. That feels really good for me. That feels pretty good for an uncommon here because, again, in a lot of ways, these are a free roll. Once you go ahead and assemble this thing, every 3rd turn, this is going to happen. Getting 2 1/1s every 3rd turn feels actually pretty decent, and they are artifacts. Optical Optimizer. Similar to the card we just saw where it turns something into an artifact, and then you can tap the creature to draw a card this time as opposed to gain 3 life. That's a lot better. Like, again, yes, I do have to tap the creature, but drawing a card, I'm more happy to try to make that work than just to gain 3 life. So this one feels a lot better to me. This one's an uncommon. Rapid Prototyper. This is actually very sweet mythic for this particular faction. Works well with a lot of the other contraptions we've seen. We've seen contraptions that will turn a creature into an artifact creature until end of turn. So imagine stacking some of those on the same sprocket as this. And of course, you stack them in such a way that this will occur last. And you're going to get a bigger construct out of it. Also, we saw the one that created the gnome tokens. That's going to help for bigger constructs down the road too. Very, very good card for this particular faction. And again, remember, contraptions also count as artifacts. Very important. Record Store. Great art on this card, by the way. And also a great rare on top of it for a contraption here. Now, what's nice about this, again, it matters how many artifacts you have in play. So it does work well with a lot of the other contraptions that we've seen. And the more artifacts you have in play, the deeper you can go into your library. That's actually a pretty big deal. This card feels really good. Treadmill. Okay, this one's a common, so we're kind of back to these type of cards. But this one's still good. +1/+2, vigilance till end of turn. Again, it's just kind of a free roll that happens. And it can turn something into an artifact, which could definitely matter. Widget Contraption. Feels like a good uncommon contraption here, actually. This card in particular allows you to get another contraption, which also counts as, say it with me now, another artifact, which is what this faction is all about. Water Market. Okay, this is a land, and it is not tied to the faction we're looking at today. It's actually useful for all factions. So what's it do? Well, it taps for 2 colorless mana, and I can only spend that to cast spells with watermarks. But like I said, it doesn't have to be just this faction we've been talking about today. It can be any watermark. Super, super sweet, actually. And again, if you do play with this card with black border cards, Opens up a whole world of possibilities. There's a lot of cards out there with watermarks that aren't just on cards. They're from this set. Ravnica guilds, like I said before, clans from cons. Just a lot of things you could do with this card. Generally, a lot of efficiency could come out of this if you're playing like some sort of silver border / black border commander, for example. Alright, I usually don't show basic lands in these set reviews, but I just want to say these are so sweet. Like, these look amazing. And on top of that, too, the tokens. They look awesome, too. These are all going to be in foil, mind you. You have the Brainiac token, you have the Construct here. You have a Dragon token, of course, from the Sword of Dungeons & Dragons. You're going to have a Fairy Spy. You get a Gnome token, of course. We saw cards that interact with that today. Goat token, Goblin token, Rogue token, Squirrel token. I love the art there, too. Stormcrow, of course. We'll be talking more about that in the future. And there's these potential double-sided tokens, too. Now, not all of the tokens will have the full art on the back. I think 50% of them will. But you're going to get these particular tokens, which are kind of like classic Magic creature-type tokens. This one being an angel. These are also in foil. Half the time, they'll have that beautiful full art on the back. The other half of the time, they'll just have a normal back, which is what, a tip card or ad card or whatever, unfortunately. But when you get one, I'm sure they'll feel special. The angel looks amazing. There's a beast token. Clue token, elemental token, another elemental. This one, though, sometimes hard to find, has been a little pricey in the past, so this is a nice inclusion. Sapperling token, spirit token, looks really cool. Thopter token, vampire, and zombie. I usually don't look at tokens, and like I said, basic lands in these set reviews, but these all look so sweet. I wanted to throw them in there, especially considering I can't wait to see what they look like in foil. Gonna be really amazing. Alright, with that being said, those are the cards for today. This is part 1. We have 4 more parts to look at, 4 more factions, and I'm looking forward to the journey. A lot of crazy cards out there. A set seems like it's gonna be super fun to play. And again, just what you make out of it, I think. If you have a fun group of people and you play some limited or some like sealed draft, you're gonna have a great time. Some players may be okay incorporating some of these cards into Commander. I think that could be very fun too. I mean, there's even some buzz around like block formats with unsets or maybe a special Commander format in the future. That could be very sweet. I think a lot of cards in the set are very conducive to that idea, and that's kind of cool. So yeah, I'm looking forward to see what happens in the future. I hope we get more unsets. I hope this isn't the last one. Hope it really sells well. With that being said, I will see you all in part 2. Until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.